Tonight we'll be hearing a new iteration in the series Encoded Revolt, a collection of works which encode the coordinates and surrounding data of airstrikes in the Syrian war within music. These compositions act as a new form of embedded activism, candidly and covertly protesting against government censorship. First performed at the Imperial War Museum to open the exhibition Syria, A Conflict Explored in April 2017, I composed a piece of music using the data of an airstrike which occurred that morning. Sadly, nearly a year on, and after 7 years of conflict, the war is still claiming innocent lives. Before discussing the details of tonight's performance that Milan will play, I'd like to take a few steps back and speak about the theoretical underpinnings to the series and the conditions that have led me to protest against censorship through the medium of sound. In 1993, a cartoon was published in the New York Times of two dogs sat by a desktop computer, one talking to the other, with the caption, "On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog." These two computer-savvy canines were online at a time when the internet was associated with anonymity. Now, it's synonymous with mass surveillance. Not only can a government surveillance agencies know that you're a dog, they can review your spending on frisbees and read your emails regarding that handsome Labrador you met at this year's crafts. Today, you don't have to be talking to a terror suspect to have your mobile phone, email, Facebook, Twitter, or Skype data analyzed. The NSA is allowed 3 hops from a target, friends of friends of friends. So, for example, if you've got 350 friends on Facebook, 3 hops away is a network larger than Sweden. And if you've got 850 friends, it's more than the population of Australia. So what data can they access? Facebook stores every message you've ever sent, all the contents on your phone, your call history, every location you've opened the app at. Last Thursday, a US proposal was filed, suggesting that most visitors to the US would be asked for their social media identifiers, giving the state access to 5 years' worth of their history. The NSA could probably gain access to this data anyway, but it's the public's knowledge that they have access to it that makes it more of an attack on free speech, the First Amendment. Therefore, if you're looking to travel to the US, you might not be so quick to post a meme about Trump's golden locks or his tiny hands. In other words, you'll begin to self-censor. If you look at the country with the most rigid censorship strategy in the world, China. In 1987, the first email to be sent from China was entitled "Beyond the Great Wall, Joining the World," signifying a hope that the internet would move beyond the country, beyond self-encapsulation, into a global society. Now, the Chinese government blocks sites, erases inconvenient content, and reroutes searches to the Tiananmen Square massacre to items favorable to the Communist Party. Citizens' knowledge of the harsh repercussions of speaking out against the government deters them from doing so, therefore resulting in self-censorship. In a quarter of a lifetime, in both democracies and dictatorships, we've moved from anonymity and dog surfing the web to mass surveillance and increasingly impressive self-censorship. So, how do you protest against censorship? Whilst there have been many marches, in more stringent climates, organisation of such events can be restricted by online surveillance, and whilst also being physically dangerous. But even in democratic conditions, I feel more disillusioned with these established physical methods of protest, like the placard or the march, that sit amongst years of clever puns and satirical punchlines that shout directly into the echo chamber. Returning to China, I'd like to explain an example of censorship subversion, and something I see as a safer, more effective form of protest than any placard. China's tonal language means that a slight variation in tone can gravely change the meaning of words. Puns are therefore commonplace and have been harnessed as an innocent medium to embed political speech. One example is the phrase grass, mud, horse, which, if pronounced slightly differently, means the more offensive phrase that I won't pronounce here, but let's just say it involves the insultee's mother. Images of this grass mud horse that looks a bit like a llama propagate across the internet as a subversive in-joke, allowing individuals to express an opinion about state policy without the usual ramifications. Acting in a similar way is a theory of political protest developed by Ethan Zuckerman, which discusses ways that activists can covertly organize online and disseminate content. It suggests that by hiding activist content within an innocent form, like a website for posting pictures of cute cats, subversive content cannot be easily isolated by government censors. Even if this activism was uncovered by government censor and the website was shut down, people would protest because they were unable to share pictures of cute cats, therefore alerting non-activist individuals to a government censorship strategy. The act of subverting surveillance and designing innovative scenarios for free speech is something I believe is a form of activism in its own right. But what to me is the most important of these examples is the use of an innocent medium of collective usage to embed political speech. This is why, for the series Encoded Revolt, I determined sound as a new medium for protesting against censorship. Sound is an analog, immaterial, and universal medium. It's fleeting and autonomous, impermanent and ungraspable. When you hear sound, after it's gone, off into the air, never to be captured. Music is inscribed somewhere between noise and silence, deemed the organization of sound. And like most forms of production, what the musician produces vanishes without a trace, consumed by those present in the immediate environment, but only stored in memory as a sonic moment. Music, therefore, in its immaterial essence, sits outside of exchange value principles. However, this notion of immateriality is accompanied by a set of contradictions, where music manifests in material forms, through objects of production like instruments, hi-fis, vocal cords, and storage like vinyl, CDs, MP3s, WAVs. And whilst these objects can be censored, destroyed, deleted, the waveform of sound cannot. It's too universal, too immaterial. By encoding digital information within music, it can avoid the detection of censors through its encryption, but it can also avoid erasure through its analog and innocent form. So, translating data into sound. I first had to develop a system of translation. The practice of encoding information in music dates back to Bach's encryption of his own family name within his compositions. This quite narcissistic first example of translating text to frequency consisted of notes B flat, A, C, and B natural, with B natural defined as H in German. Whilst I couldn't encode the entire alphabet and all numerical digits through Bach's method, I decided to break down the data into its code makeup. Hexadecimal is a base 16 computer code. Whilst the most well-known computer code, binary, has 2 parameters, 0s and 1s, hexadecimal has 16, ranging from 0 to 9 and A to F. So I now had 16 variables to work with. Alongside hexadecimal code, I began looking into the movement of serialism. Serialism is a compositional movement that it might be easier to understand by explaining what it was reacting against, the work of Wagner. Wagner's musical pursuit was a Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art that synthesized all previous art forms. His operas were so epic, tonally consistent, and awe-encompassing. After the war, these qualities and his standing as Hitler's favorite composer meant his compositions came to be associated with totalitarianism. In reaction, Schoenberg pioneered serialism through the development of his 12-tone technique, a way of structuring the 12 notes on the chromatic scale. For example, rather than a major scale, where one note has dominance over the rest, all notes would have unity in Schoenberg's rows. The result is systematically produced atonal unified music. This purely tonal system was progressed by Messiaen in the development of similar ordered systems for duration, dynamics, and articulation. So the system I've derived converges the base 16 hexadecimal code with an increased version of Schoenberg's 12-tone series and a decreased version of Messiaen's 24 duration series. Therefore, every digit could be played as both a tone and a duration, and therefore played as music. When encoding the data in this way, it only amounted to a short composition. In this piece, I think it's the first 9 bars. Whilst these were interesting in themselves, I wanted to progress the compositions musically, in line with serialist techniques. Taking the initial bars, I began adding compositional techniques used by Schoenberg and Messiaen, like transposition of pitch, augmentation, retrograde, inversion, each working on top of the last. Each technique acts like a cipher, encrypting the data further. Whilst the initial bars are easily decipherable, with every iteration, the information becomes harder to decode, still technically decodable with the key. Gradually, the piece and the data it conveys is progressed both in its musicality and its encryption. At this point, I'd like to refer to the data which I thought it was important to safeguard from censorship through sound, and the reasons why. I'd like to talk about the war in Syria, the conflict censorship, and its crimes against humanity. In the year 2000, Bashar al-Assad's first speech as the president of Syria spoke of the need for constructive criticism, transparency, and democracy. There was a hope among Syrians that he would bring change and reform. There was a hope that he'd be better than his father. This hope was not realized. If anyone were to criticize him, his father, the government, either verbally or online, they were often imprisoned for undisclosed periods of time, tortured or killed. Fear and vaguely worded laws that invited government abuse led to self-censorship, and the regime was upheld. In 2010, the Arab Spring, a series of uprisings across the Middle East, led to the fall of dictators in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. When 2 children wrote the words, "Your turn, doctor," on the wall of their school in Syria, referring to the medically trained Bashar al-Assad, they were taken to detention centres, brutally tortured and murdered, their bodies being released to the families as an example of the consequences of questioning the regime. Many deem this savage act of murder and censorship as the beginning of the uprisings in Syria and the subsequent war. The regime has regularly shut down the internet, banned websites for political reasons, disabled mobile phones, silenced media coverage, and hacked websites to post pro-regime material. However, it's not only the Syrian government's censorship strategy that has led me to see a grave importance in preserving the conflict's data. There's a massive discrepancy between the number of civilian casualties recorded by independent investigations and the statistics released by both the Russian and the US governments. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights states that Russian airstrikes have killed over 5,000 civilians, about a quarter of them children, in the space of just 2 years. Russia claims that they are targeting Islamic State militants, but reports and images from people on the ground say that the mass suffering is that of civilians. Russian forces are using the small presence of former al-Qaeda affiliates as justification to continue the bombing of rebel-held regions, essentially just gaining back territory for Assad. In February this year, in response to the many child casualties in the deadliest 48 hours of the conflict since 2013, UNICEF issued a blank statement, accompanied by this explanation. No words will do justice to the children killed, their mothers, their fathers, and their loved ones. We no longer have the words to describe children's suffering and our outrage. Do those inflicting the suffering have words to justify their barbaric acts? It seems there's such a saturation of horrifying images, statistics, videos of the conflict of Syria that we, the public, have become desensitized to these media forms and the distress that they represent. As UNICEF felt silence conveyed their outrage better than words, it seems that now both qualitative and quantitative media forms fail to fully communicate the conflict and the distress. Music provides a new, untested media form for emotional engagement with the Syrian conflict's data. By translating quantitative information into the audio form, music speaks to the public, where digits and data fail. The Encoded Revolt series tackles both the need for new forms of media engagement with the conflict in Syria and the requirement to creatively evade censorship. This quote from Victor Hugo summarizes why music can be a medium to confront both these issues. Music expresses that which cannot be said, and on which it is impossible to be silent. I'd now like to introduce tonight's performance. This piece denotes the coordinates and the date of an airstrike occurring on the 19th of February this year in Al-Shafniya, located in the eastern Ghouta of Damascus. This side responsible for the strike and the reported number of civilian casualties are encoded through pizzicato and varying dynamics. The airstrike occurred within the most deadly 48 hours of the conflict since 2013. for which UNICEF issued their blank statement. 22 strikes hit this small settlement in that time. 5 days later, the same spot was targeted with chlorine gas in what would constitute a war crime. The location was once a rebel-held territory inhabited by civilians, but now it's controlled by government forces.